Welcome to the annual Advanced Study in Student Cultural Psychiatry of the Division of Social and Transcultural Psychiatry of McGill University. This year's Advanced Study Institute is on the arts in cultural psychiatry, and we look forward to a very enjoyable conference today and workshop over the next few days. Previous Advanced Study Institutes have covered a wide range of topics. The first was in 1999 on the politics of trauma, and last year's on the politics of diversity. This year we're very happy to be engaging with the topic of the arts, which has great relevance for cultural psychiatry in many ways, and we'll be exploring a broad set of questions including the nature of creative, artistic, and aesthetic processes of invention, enactment, and improvisation, the role of the arts in constructing and expressing individual and collective identities, especially public, social, or political uses of art to raise awareness and challenge marginality and oppression, the arts as media for articulating, understanding, and coping with the experience of mental health and illness, and art making as a creative medium for individual therapeutic exploration, growth, and transformation, as well as for collective conflict resolution and mental health promotion. In this introductory talk, I'd like to make a few comments about the importance of art in relation to identity and community, and to at least point toward the sense in which we can understand art as part of an underlying process of poesis. And so my talk is entitled Art, Identity, and Community Toward a Poetics of Illness and Healing. What I'd like to touch on in the next few minutes are some general considerations about the importance of art, a few words about the perspective of cultural psychiatry, and then some consideration of art as process, as a way of working with identity, as a way of encountering and engaging with alterity, that is otherness, and as a way of mobilizing a set of healing processes. And we'll head toward a set of questions for reflection in the course of our conference today and the workshop to follow. The arts play a unique role in human experience as both solitary and communal modes of inquiry, expression, and creation. All societies have traditions of fashioning objects, language, and performance in ways that serve to transmit culture, explore the world, entertain, and edify. Aside from giving something that we could call aesthetic pleasure, artistic activity can serve important personal and social functions. These include building, or constructing, and expressing individual and collective identity, engaging with creative processes that yield new ways of experiencing and understanding the world, undergirding or advancing social and political projects that reveal, critique, or challenge existing frameworks and received wisdom, and in our own case in the field of mental health, constituting modalities for therapeutic intervention. So then, active engagement with the arts can clearly transform suffering, giving meaning to affliction and support recovery. And this occurs not only in the explicit form of art therapies within mental health, but also in everyday experiences of engaging as a reader of fiction or poetry, as a viewer of visual arts, film, as a listener to music, and all the other modalities that are used in ways to lift the human spirit and give meaning. In the microcosm of artistic creation, we have a kind of alchemical process that parallels the larger process of culture creation as it's gone on over millennia. And for that matter, in the deliberate use of the arts as provocation, which often occurs in contemporary societies and even in traditional societies where the artist has the power to use images and ideas in ways that can rock some of the foundations of society, we have the moment really again of challenging and critiquing culture and of creating new culture, new forms of life, new possibilities. So this is of great interest to all of us who are concerned with the role of culture and community in the human spirit and in human possibility. There's also this notion that somehow through the use of arresting images and engagement with
media, it's possible for people to convey aspects of experience that are difficult to get hold of otherwise. And people may not have the words or the capacity to express in conventional communication some of the key things that they're feeling and experiencing. And somehow through other media, it's possible to give a glimmer of that to each other. So the arts become a very important channel for us to get a sense or a feeling of another's world, whether that comes through literature or through film or through other media. And finally, we're especially interested in the arts as a process of transformation, but throughout that, from the point of view of cultural psychiatry, in the interplay between individual experience, between people's own unique voice, and the background knowledge, the shared knowledge, the community context that people necessarily have to draw from, both to assemble their own experience and to be intelligible to each other. So it's that interplay between the individual and the social world that is one of the preoccupations of cultural psychiatry, and one way in which it shifts the emphasis a bit from sort of a lot of the discussion in psychiatry in North America, and the West at least, which has a very strong focus on the individual, as though individuals were somewhat isolated, as though the whole world was inside the skull of a person, and the sort of social cultural perspective insists that, as John Blofield puts it, the long road begins and ends within the confines of the human skull, but between beginning and ending, it traverses a very large world of others that are deeply important to our own self-understanding and refiguration. So perhaps we're hampered in some ways in thinking about the arts in contemporary society because we have very elaborate institutions associated with the arts, associated with the commercialization of art, and we have certain iconic images that then are brought forward because they capture popular imagination. But behind those billboards kind of for popular art is a whole flurry of activity by many people in a much more intimate, individual, interior, small-scale way often that is equally worthy, in fact, perhaps more so, of our attention for those of us who are working in a more individual way, in a more local way with people's experience. In trying to think about what's distinctive about the arts, this is my first pass list, actually done with Elizabeth Anthony, trying to assemble a list of some elements that might be distinct about the arts. And one thing I would invite from all of you is to help to elaborate this list, to think about this. What would be the elements, the kinds of process issues that we should be thinking about when we try to characterize what's distinctive about the arts? At the center, I'm putting this sort of Aristotelian idea of poiesis, of fashioning, of making, and the kind of practical knowledge and wisdom and engagement with material that goes on in poiesis. But we also then privilege the idea of aesthetics, that there's some way of noticing our engagement with the world at the level of what is pleasing to us, what is beautiful, what is interesting to us at the level of its sensory and sensual qualities. Creativity is something we associate very strongly with the arts, notwithstanding the fact that most artistic activity in most parts of the world is deeply rooted in tradition, and a great deal of artistic activity is reproducing tradition rather than necessarily innovating in any particular way, although clearly even in those places where the premium is on people reproducing things, there are people who do that very well and with great beauty and distinctiveness, and people who do it less so. So there is still behind that some notion of creative engagement with tradition. And of course, in the contemporary world, we highly value people who break away from tradition in some way, introduce radical new ideas. That's a very important culture-making process. I think essential to the artistic process, and one of the reasons that we're looking forward to this meeting as a kind of enjoyable time, is the idea that one can engage in some way that we could call playful, that there's a kind of exploring of possibilities, a kind of working in an as-if realm, a transitional space, a way that allows us the freedom and the safety to really try to see things differently, and sometimes radically differently. And then related to that is a kind of notion of receptivity, of being able to be deeply attentive to process, to be engaged and absorbed in ways. And this is something, in fact, all these things have reflections both in the maker, in the person who's identified as the artist in a particular process, and the audience or the participant or the receiver. So there's a lot of work, of course, in literary theory and other areas arguing that artistic process engages an audience or a receiver as essential to the process, and that the person who is looking at an image or reading a story or listening to a poem is participating very actively in that process and contributing in significant ways. And so it's interesting to ask ourselves, what are the parallels between those two processes, and in what ways might they differ? And finally, the notion that these activities, which might be very individual and idiosyncratic at certain moments, become structured, become formalized, become ritualized, and in that repetition and ritual and formal structure, we develop a kind of container for experiences that might otherwise be maybe more wildly transgressive or inchoate or out of control in some way. And so there's an interesting tension between the kind of breaking of boundaries, exploring new things, and containment and familiarity. And in the most mundane way, you can see this for all of us, I think, in things like music, where we all tend to favor some balance between what's extremely familiar and predictable and what is a little bit novel and surprising, and that gives us a kind of a frisson of pleasure when we hear that, and where we all are on that sort of balance between what we need for what that's familiar and what is novel and maybe destabilizing is both a personality trait and difference and a state that we can move in or out of in terms of the level of novelty that we want. I'm not going to belabor this right now, something we'll talk about in the workshop, but I think one powerful way to understand a lot of artistic transformation, not only verbal but also imagery-based, is through the contemporary theory of metaphor. In cognitive science, there's a lot of work now in helping us understand how metaphor constructions are basic to all thought. That is, thinking of one thing in terms of another is basic to the human ability to extend thinking and imagination, and that has an embodied nature. That is to say, our abstract cognitive processes are grounded in basic bodily experiences, and that, I think, is a very important notion for our discussions today. And this image from William Blake from the Book of Urizen is just meant to speak to that in terms of one basic metaphor that we use all the time, set of metaphors centered around the notion of stance. And we can take a stand and we can be upright in our stance, or we can be cowed and broken down by life. And that vocabulary, which is also very strongly a moral vocabulary, has its roots in bodily experience, as you can see very graphically here. And that is used then to link basic embodied experiences with larger overarching narratives of experience. So this, for me, is a way, using some basic experimental and theoretical work about the nature of metaphor, to begin to explain how it is we link together bodily processes that have a certain phenomenological structure and social discursive processes. And those become enshrined and structured by collective narratives in some way. So metaphors, which at one time were fresh and unique, the first time somebody made an analogy between the lip of a cup and the lip of a human being, that was a new way of describing things and maybe a bit startling. And then it becomes a dead metaphor. We take it all for granted. It's just the name for something until Walt Disney makes a cartoon where the cup, begins to talk, and we find it amusing, and we're being reminded of where those metaphors came from in the first place. So these things can be brought back to life, even though they're sort of lying quiescent, sedimented beneath our everyday language. And the point coming from metaphor theory from George Lakoff and Mark Johnson and Gray Gibbs, many other people contributed to this, is that genealogy of our concepts is ever present. It's a constant embodied presence under language and under thought all the time. I say underthought. Gerard Manley Hopkins called it the overthought, by putting, in a way, trying to put more emphasis on the importance of that metaphoric structure in our everyday thinking. So the second theme we're going to be talking about is art and identity, the ways in which art is used to articulate identity. And I wanted to give you one brief example of that that I think illustrates many elements of this and touches on the healing issue. So I'm going to show you a video of John Henrik Daniels. It takes about 5 minutes. I'll take a few minutes into our program to do my allotted 30 minutes here. John Henrik Daniels is a young man. He's in this film, you'll see in a moment, he's 26 years old, and he won the contest on Sweden's Got Talent. So I won't have time to show you the panel's response, but basically most of them were crying at the end of this. He won, and they made these comments about how they've never heard something so heartfelt, even though they didn't understand a word of it. So you've had the same experience, because it's sung in Sami, and much of it is just wordless chanting. So you've had the same experience. Now, I saw this in Iqaluit a month ago at the Circumpolar Health Conference presented by Sami psychologist, who made the point that this guy, as somebody who was adopted from Colombia, had experienced a lot of abuse, actually, a lot of stigma, both within the Sami community and as a Sami from outside the Sami community, and was told many times by Sami, you're not a real Sami, you know, because obviously you're brown skin, how could you be a real Sami, et cetera, et cetera. After this sort of winning this national contest in an art form that's deeply central to Sami identity, he became a hero of young Sami, and he's got albums out. You can go on YouTube, on iTunes and buy this. He went on to the Eurostar contest and so on. The last 2 points, very briefly. Art involves us with otherness in some ways. The very act of artistic creation, something that Elizabeth Anthony's insisted on, gets us engaged with the material in a way that is such that it presents a kind of otherness to us, and we have to be very attentive to that and work with that in some way. So whether it's another person, or whether it's the canvas in front of us, or the words that we're struggling to give a certain shape to, then that is a kind of experience of alterity, and that stands for perhaps a more basic kind of alterity, that is the way we present ourselves to each other, as in some ways mysterious and other and deeply fascinating. And so that can also be then applied to trying to understand processes of psychopathology. So this is an image of the Japanese artist Chihiro Shiota, who's, I think she's just exhibited at the Vienna Biennial. She lives in Berlin. And this is a woman sitting on a hospital bed in a room densely intersected with black yarn. And the experience of seeing this kind of thing, and which you can essentially walk into or walk close to, is deeply disquieting and strange, and very much like suddenly being in a physical dreamscape in some ways. And so she's able to take mundane situations and make them radically other in a way, simply by, and the material is very mundane material, but the visual configuration, as you can see, is deeply strange in some ways, and both looks in a way like, I guess, a line drawing in some ways, but again, you're not getting the sense of the three-dimensionality of it here. Along those lines, there are people who have used language both to underscore the nature of alterity and to try to bridge it, and emblematic of that process is the poet Paul Celan, who wrote out of a Holocaust experience, trying to find ways to use a language that had been taken over by mass murderers, but which was his first language, and his language of his mother, and language of his artistic creation, and to try to find a way to reclaim it in a process of building a human community. So you see his last statement, that creating a poem is giving a gift, and it's giving a gift to the attentive, a gift of attention to the attentive. And so for Celan, I would say notwithstanding, but really because of his deep sense of alienation, alienation from self, alienation from community, language and the struggle to express experience through language became central to building a bridge to others. And you can see that for him, there's an ethics of that. There's an ethics that says, in a way, that we need to speak the truth. And this is another, I think, key question: to what extent do the arts allow us, as much as they are fictive, as much as they can play with reality and transform it and create imaginative possibilities, to what extent do they speak to particular kinds of truth? And finally, our preoccupation here, the arts as modalities of healing. I won't say more about that. I think the whole day is going to be addressing that. And what I'll do is stop here and introduce our next speaker.